Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, we are visiting with Tim Raile from St. Francis in the northwest corner of Kansas. Tim is the fourth generation of his family operating the farm near St. Francis, Kansas. His son Michael returned to the farm in 2012. Over the past several years, Tim and Michael have undertaken the monumental task of converting all of their production from conventional to organic, and we will talk about that with Tim on this episode. So, Tim, before we get into all of that, let's start by setting up kind of a baseline of your operation. I know on your website, you've got farming spanning back 6 centuries. I think you've really done some good genealogy work, and it's kind of fascinating, but give us a brief history of your family farm.
Well, I won't go back 6 centuries. That might be a little boring, but we were Germans from Russia. My great-grandfather was a German from Russia. So they migrated from that Moldova, Ukraine area in 1885, and they looking for a better life here in the United States, and they found it in northwest Kansas, believe it or not.
This is the 150th anniversary of Mennonites coming from Russia and bringing Turkey red wheat with them. I take it your family was probably not Mennonites, though? Just escaping, I believe you said they just didn't want to serve in the war over there because that was a death sentence if you were in the military in Russia. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And taxes. Catherine the Great allowed them to come into, or encouraged them to come into that area when she was Tsar of Russia. And of course, she was German, if you know the history, and encouraged them to come down there and help develop that area because the Germans were known to be really good farmers. So they took the monumental task of moving from Germany to Russia, or that Moldova, Ukraine area, and down the Danube River basically on rafts. Many of them died on the way. Most of the heritage of St. Francis is from that area. If you look at a plat map of a little town called Gleikenstall in Moldova, it looks almost like a plat map in St. Francis. Same names, very similar names. So I find it fascinating. But my sister, I have to contribute her for all the genealogy research. She's the one she's traced our family back that far, not me.
Well, let's jump into the farming part of it. When did you start contemplating converting your farm over to organic production?
I've always been intrigued with organic going way back. Even when I decided to convert to complete no-till, I'd actually considered it at that time, but I kind of received some misinformation about organic and fertilizer availability, and I just thought that wasn't a path I wanted to go down at that time. That was in the late 1990s. We decided to go to complete no-till instead, so totally the opposite direction. So we basically, through those early 2000s, we sold all our machinery and we ended up completely 100% no-till. All I had was a planter and a sprayer and a drill. We did that for quite a few years. But then around, 2010, 2012, and there we started seeing some issues with that type of farming. The weeds seemed to be getting resistant to chemicals, and it was getting real frustrating, and we kept putting on more chemicals and higher rates and trying all kinds of different combinations, and with some success and some no success. So it kind of culminated, I suppose, around 2014, somewhere in there, when I actually had to destroy a crop because the weeds took it. We had a complete chemical fail. It would have been one of my fields that had been in complete no-till the longest. That was so frustrating to have to destroy a perfectly good crop, and it was a helpless feeling. And about that same time, we had a gentleman came to us. He had some expiring CRP, really nice level ground right next to us that was just right. It's in the edge of Colorado, and asked us to farm that ground. And we realized that a little bit of research that anything coming out of CRP is considered 100% organic as long as it had no chemical on it. So we were able to sell our first crop off of that as organic. We didn't have to go through the 3-year transition and certification process. So that kind of launched us into that. And then once we got into it and we felt that it was maybe the path we wanted to go with the rest of acres, that wasn't our intention at first. We were just going to keep those new CRP acres as organic. But once we got into it, we really liked the idea of the organic. And once we got associated with that, the greater world in organic, we thought, let's start the whole farm. So that's basically what launched it.
Before you made that leap to the whole farm, I imagine you did a lot more homework and maybe put things down on paper. But in that conversion process, well, let's talk about the conversion process. So, like you mentioned, I believe it is a 3-year process to be completely organic certified. So, where do you start? I mean, do you have to establish a baseline with a third party organic certifier? How does that work?
We did do that. You don't actually have to. You can just start as long as you can prove that ground has been with affidavits that has had no chemical on it for the last 3 years. You can transition anything into organic. And so, but we decided we wanted to go through the process. And so at that time, it was kind of new for organic certifiers to do an organic transitional certification. Only a few would do that. But so we decided we wanted to be able to learn that process and make sure we got it down pat because we didn't want any mistakes. So we actually did get a transitional organic certificate, which was kind of an oddity at that time. And it really helped us understand the processes and in going through all the certification. Get a yearly certification. Our certifier comes to our farm. He'll spend basically the whole day. It's kind of like an IRS audit. They will go through every aspect of your farm and do mass balances of your sales to make sure that you're not selling a conventional crop as organic. So it's quite a process. So we wanted to make sure we had it right. So we started doing that. It's not necessarily required, but we chose to go down that route.
So you mentioned when you converted to no-till, obviously you lighten up on your equipment, have a planter, not the tillage equipment necessarily. In converting over to organic, I imagine that changed a little bit too. What different equipment did you have to purchase?
Yeah, since I sold all of our tillage equipment, now I was buying tillage equipment again. That was offset by not having to buy chemical anymore. So it was almost a wash as far as expense, except obviously the equipment is an asset where chemical is just an expense and it's gone. So it felt better buying machinery because it was an asset and you knew you were going to have it versus the chemical. It just basically disappears.
So walk us through a crop rotation year now, how things look like basis an organic wheat operation.
Well, in our area, we're very arid areas. So we get anywhere from 12 to 14 inches of rain a year is our annual rainfall. And so summer fallows are still predominant around here. Through no-till, we were able to do, continuous cropping. But with wheat, it just doesn't seem to work out. And we've tried dry land, row crops, and they don't seem to work out so well for us because there's just too much tillage involved with it. So wheat it seems to be easy. It seems to be the perfect match for organic, at least in our opinion. So that's what we do mostly. But so we're a wheat summer fallow. We are incorporating proso millet into that summer fallow period. That's been a really good crop for us. And it's food grade proso millet, so we're not selling it for bird seed. Traditionally, that's what it's sold for. So we will rotate that through the crop because in the organic world, they want biodiversity. They like to see different crops grown, and they really encourage that a lot. They do allow sunflowers or summer fallow to be considered your rotational crop. But if you were in an area of continuous crop, you can't have like continuous wheat or continuous corn or anything like that. They require it to be a rotation.
Obviously, you've got to have marketplaces identified before you work into an organic system. So how did you go about that process? Did people approach you or did you seek them out?
No, that is something it can be very challenging if that's not, in your DNA to do that, to go out and really research it and go after those markets. It can be daunting. There are some what would be more traditional ways of selling crops through brokers. But we chose not to go down that route. We just didn't have really good experiences. So we actually contacted mills first. When we were in the transitional period, we contacted several organic mills and just to find out what kind of wheat they wanted or what they liked, if they saw any varieties that seemed to mill better. And we made that contact early on before we could even sell anything to them. And we would send them samples of the wheat that we were growing that worked well on our farm just to see if they liked those particular varieties, and then we could continue on with that. So, yeah, we established that through that transitional period. So then when we were organic, we already had that connection with them. They've been used to talking to us because it is a little daunting to try to find those markets. It's a task. It's lots of phone calls. You'll make 100 phone calls and hopefully 2 of them will land.
So is any of that contract, or it's just you've identified the buyer and they're a willing buyer if the commodity is good?
We've done both. I prefer to raise the crop first because then again we're shooting for food grade products. So we want to have the crop in hand, and then that we can do a better job of marketing if we know we've got a good milling quality. We run all the tests on it prior to even calling any potential buyers. But now that we built a relationship with Central Milling, which is an organic mill in Logan, Utah, we don't necessarily do that. They pretty well buy our crop every single year, 100% of it. But early on, we tested it, and then I could call around and market it and tell them, hey, I've got this high protein wheat, it's high test weight, and we've done the milling tests, it's good quality. Then I could be more aggressive with my marketing. But if I had more of a feed grade product, then I knew it couldn't be very aggressive. I better go with what I can get.
So logistics wise, I assume you've got to have some on-farm storage, correct?
Yes, that's another downfall of organic. You have to have your own storage because obviously you can't deliver it clear to Logan, Utah at harvest time. So that's pretty tough. But so we built enough grain storage to where we can, and a little bit more. We're about 110% of our needs are. That way, if they don't get all the crop moved before the next harvest, which that's what we're facing right now, they haven't got it all moved yet, but that's their intention to have most of it all moved before this next coming harvest.
And do they move it?
Yes. Yeah. Everything we sell, on the wheat side, everything we've sold is considered FOB, so picked up at our farm price. And they find the truckers, the company that we're associated with, Central Milling, they have a sister company they have their own trucks. But we have a large enough quantity that they have to hire outside trucking firms to come in also that they've been associated with for years.
But it sounds like they're pulling from your stores throughout the calendar year then, trying to get it out before the next harvest?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Normally, we have not had any problem for the last 3 years. I guess flour sales were slow in January and February for whatever reason, just market trends. So they weren't able to move product as quickly as they'd like to because they have limited storage too. And of course, they're pulling from other farmers. So they try to balance that out with everybody. Because they know we all need it moved and need the income from it.
Do you find extra challenges keeping wheat in condition and storage using organic practices? Being in an arid climate you are in, I'm sure helps. But what are the challenges with storage and conditioning of the wheat?
It's not, wheat's pretty easy to store. Our biggest challenge is grain weevils. There's some products out there we can use. It's called diatomaceous earth. It's been a gardening product for years. People use it to keep pests out of their tomato plants, that kind of thing. But of course, we buy it in bulk and we put it in with the grain as we're augering it in. It's totally OMRI listed, so it's approved by the Organic Association for our use to use. That hasn't been too bad of a challenge. We have had weevils. Usually it's just a spot thing in the cone. So we'll make sure we auger out the cones or watch them really quickly after harvest. But no, it has not been a problem.
Well, let's get back into agronomics of wheat in an organic situation, just as a refresher for people maybe not familiar with it. Crop inputs, fertilizer, weed control, pest control, how does that work?
It's just different products for the most part. Obviously, we don't have as many things in the toolbox we can use. We'll just start out with fertilizer. We use compost from a local feed yard here. So we're putting on just as much nitrogen, potassium as we were before. And in fact, I feel it's a better form and actually less expensive. But we're using, because you get all these micronutrients with it and biologicals that come with that compost too. So we feel like we're fertilizing just as good as before. We haven't seen a yield drag. I know that's always kind of been the thing with organic. People say, well, I don't want the yield drag. I need that extra yield. But we haven't experienced that. We've been able to keep up with that. We're actually going to back off a little bit on our composting. We feel like now we've got good levels of phos. We're going to use biologicals,
sure,
which is kind of a big thing in the conventional world now, too. It's kind of funny how that's the two worlds are kind of coming together. All of a sudden, when I hear conventional farmers talking about using biologicals, I just smile. That's something organics have been using for a long time.
Yeah.
So we use that in, I don't know if you've heard of compost tea.
Sure.
So we'll extract the biologicals out of with a compost tea extractor, And I have a gentleman that does that for me, and then we'll apply that and along with some other products too. And then we also sometimes we'll come back and top dress if we like what we're getting ready to do, or we're just now hitting flag leaf here. So we're going to try to, in hopes of bumping our protein level. There again, quality means everything to us. Yield means very little, to be honest with you. It's because if we can hit that food grade market, our premiums are really, really good versus the feed grade market. So we're going to go in there and spray some either plant protein or some fish proteins, which is a nitrogen source, at flag leaf in hopes of getting bumping that protein level.
Are you defining quality the same for food grade wheat as you would for standard wheat? Is it all about the protein?
No, it's not all about the protein. That's just it. We've discovered that. I've learned so much in the last few years about what mills actually want. And just because it's high protein doesn't mean it's good milling. Then sometimes they just want high protein because they want a certain protein. They don't necessarily want high protein. When they're in, of course, in the baking world, it's very artisan. So one baker might want, a 11.5 protein average, or another one might want a 12.5 average. So if they get a bunch of wheat in that it's really high protein, they actually have to buy low protein wheat to bring it down. And vice versa. If it's low protein, they have to buy high protein. They want that certain protein. Depends on what they're baking too. If they're baking bread, they want, 12. If they're making, croissants or, muffins or cakes, they want a different protein. And then gluten content is really important to them. They want a good, strong gluten content. And then there's the falling numbers. If it doesn't meet the falling number level, they don't want it. So the protein is, I know that's a first indicator usually, but then that falls short when it comes to everything else on their level, what they want to see.
Have you found varieties that are more well suited to get the kind of quality you want in an organic environment?
Absolutely. When we pick a variety, we don't look at yield at all. We first look at milling quality, top number one, and then the protein content. And then we see how it handles disease and fungus, like stripe rust, stem rust, all the diseases. And we make sure we pick one that's really resistant to those. Yeah, the yield, that's like the fourth or fifth thing we look at, because we have to have quality tops is the top number, the one thing we have to have.
Do you have any other options outside of genetics for rust resistance? I mean, is that the only way to fight that?
There is. We haven't had to go down that path. There are a lot of organic products out there. I guess in the soybean world, even the conventional world will use these organic fungicides. I'm not exactly sure how they work, but I understand they're quite effective. They're a little more expensive than your traditional fungicides, but I hear they're very effective. But we've always just been very careful in picking a variety so we don't have to go down that path. When it comes to weed control, we want to make sure we pick varieties that they canopy well. And then we've narrowed our drill spacing down so it canopies too a little better, so we just don't have weed problems. Have not had weed or fungus or insect problems.
What is your drill spacing? I guess typically it would be a foot in that part of the country, wouldn't it?
It is. We've gone to 10 inch. We'd like to go a little narrower, but again, this country's so dry, sometimes we can't do that. We just can't get the furrows that we need. So we feel like 10 inches is as slow as we can go.
Do you have a particular seed population?
We're usually around that bushel to the acre. It depends on the size of the seed. If it's got a large seed, we basically plant by population, but if it's a large seed, we'll be down around 50 pounds. We'll be higher. We'll be around 70 pounds. If it's, a really small seed, then we'll be down, 50 pounds. So we kind of adjust according to that.
What advice would you have for your fellow farmers now that you've gone through this conversion? If someone else is considering it, I mean, they can learn a lot from you. What advice would you have for them?
Tenacity.
We've heard that word before. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to be very diligent and go through it. You got to be thick-skinned. You're going to hear a lot of negativism towards you. I can handle it. Even one of my best friends asked me when I told him we were going to farm. He said, "Oh, you're no longer going to farm," because organic farms has got a bad reputation of neglect. I think that was from the generations long ago. I think the new organic farmers are doing much better on that. So and you're supposed to contact all your neighbors when you switch to organic, and just to let them know that, this is what we're doing, and we'd ask you to be careful when you're spraying around your fields. And so that doesn't always go well. 90% of the neighbors were fine with it and supportive, but there was always those 10% that kind of balked a little bit. But we have buffers around all of our fields, so we won't harvest those. So if they were to overspray on us or something like that, those buffers are about 40 feet. So if there's a little drift or something like that, those products are always sold just into the conventional world. They're not sold as organic. So we put the buffers, we take that responsibility on us to make sure that if there's an issue that I'm not going to come back to a neighbor and complain.
Are there some challenges that you didn't anticipate when you went into this whole process?
It was, I would say, the marketing, which has been very rewarding. It's been fun for me, but you have to have that mentality that you like a challenge. And I've always one that likes challenges. You don't like challenges and you like the easy way, organic isn't for you. The marketing has been, like I said, been very rewarding. It's very rewarding to see that your crops are going for food. And we know where every one of our crops go. Like, for instance, I don't know if you've heard of Dave's Killer Bread, is where a lot of our wheat goes into. Costco, their flour. Whole Foods has a 365 brand. Their organic 365 is where most of our products go. And then on the Proso Millet, we know it goes into like Kind bars and protein bars. And it's just, I don't know, there's just a satisfaction and a pride in our crops that we never had before. When we were just selling bulk commodities and it was going to the elevator and all you cared about was the yield. Now we care about quality. And when you build that relationship with those end buyers, they're calling me wanting our product, where it was the other way. Or before, it was always the other way. I had to call and try to get my product sold all the time in that conventional world. And it's just more rewarding.
Yeah, it really must be. So, I mean, there's traceability there, obviously, too. Do the end users take advantage of that and use your family as kind of a component in their marketing to say, this is the farmer that grew this product?
Yes. Like the CEO of Central Milling has been to our farm. He plans on coming back again this year. They like to come out and take pictures and they like to put that on their websites and stuff too, that, they have this personal relationship with their farmers. It's really important to them. It's not just us. They come to a lot of their farms and you just don't see that in the other world. It's amazing how this sector is growing. And I mean, it's the fastest growing sector in the food industry right now, organic. Organic sales are increasing about 30% a year. I get calls a lot. Like, for instance, Graincraft, the main buyer for Graincraft, called me last year, and they're wanting to add a new line of organic to their line. They've already had some organic, but they're wanting to increase it because there's such a demand for it. So just to hear that, to know that people want your product, you just never had that in my other world. It's very rewarding in that sense.
You've done conventional, you've done organic. How do we move beyond pitting conventional production against organic production? It seems like there's room for both. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many, to me, where the growth can be in organic out of the conventional world is not so much in wheat. We pretty well are supplying our needs for wheat, but it's all the grain complex. We import 70% of the needs of the grain complex, mostly soybeans, from other countries. And just the opposite of the conventional world. They're exporting that much. So we're falling short as American farmers to supply the demand of what the consumer wants. We need both, for sure. We can't have it. Not everything can be organic. It's just not possible. But there's definitely a sector out there, and it's just nice to provide what the consumer wants. And be in that growing market. And is there less scrutiny on the imported organic commodities?
There wasn't supposed to be, but there's actually more scrutiny now after the last Farm Bill.
Okay.
Prior to that, they were having a lot of problems with grain coming over there, again, mostly soybeans, because they get a lot from the Black Sea region and that area, that Middle East. Some of that they found out wasn't organic. They called them the magic ships as they came across the ocean. All of a sudden, they became organic.
Yeah.
Pretty well stopped that, the last Farm Bill. And I was actually part of lobbying for that with Pat Roberts. That was a lot of fun. But we were able to get through. The company or the organization I was associated with is called OTA, Organic Trade Association, and they're a lobbying firm for the organic industry in Washington, D.C. And they lobbied very hard to get that scrutiny in there. So I think they got an extra like $1 or $2 billion or whatever for oversight. So I think a lot of that has been tied up. And there's always going to be bad actors in every industry, and there's still going to be bad actors out there. I know we've had that here in the United States in the past, but I think they're getting better about policing that and doing, like I said, mass balances. We're scrutinized very hard when they come to our farm, but I'm not going to say that everything's 100% organic when it comes through.
Well, you mentioned it's a rapidly growing market. Have you found any of your neighbors or anyone looking to you for mentoring and considering the transition to organic production?
Yes, I have. Not so much my immediate neighbors, but from around the surrounding area for sure. Yeah, they seem to be a lot of interest in it.
Well, looking back now, I mean, you've got most of this in your rear view mirror. Would you do it again? I mean, do you have any regrets or things you would have done differently?
No. I'll tell you, it's been very, very rewarding. You know, I'm kind of in the twilight of my career. It's really nice to see this is going on with the next generation. So no regrets whatsoever. It's just, I've had more fun farming in the last 5 to 6 years than I've had my whole 35 years prior to that.
Well, that's pretty significant. I'm glad you can say that. Well, Tim, any final comments before we wrap it up?
I guess I just encourage other people to look at it. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for Kansas farmers. I think like Kansas ranks 26th in the amount of organic farmers in the United States. There's other states that aren't even considered agricultural states have more organic farmers than Kansas does. I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth there and rewards. The premiums are very good. They fluctuate, but not near like conventional market. So I guess I would encourage people to look at it. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, especially in that wider range outside of wheat, the other commodities, corn. For instance, we grow blue corn also. We have a little bit of irrigation on our farm. And so those little niche sectors can be very profitable.
If you had to go back to conventional tillage for some reason, do you think your experience on organic farming would make you a better farmer?
Absolutely. But I think my experience with conventional made me a better organic farmer too. We realized the importance of residue. You know, our farm, you know, back in the 80s when we were using conventional farming, we did a lot of disking and we just never kept any residue on the surface. And now we really concentrate on keeping residue. So we're not the old school farming of the days of the Dust Bowl. Sometimes we actually keep so much residue from the previous crop when we're getting ready to plant, we have trouble getting through it because there's so much trash out there yet. But we like that. We call it mulch summer fallow mulching is what we call it, rather than just summer fallow.
Yeah.
Because we keep a bed of mulch on there. And so I learned that from the conventional world when we were using complete no-till, that how important that was. So I think they both can go hand in hand in becoming a better farmer for sure.
And what do you say about soil health through this whole process? I'm sure you monitor that. I'm sure you qualify as regenerative ag acres. Mm-hmm. Have you seen the benefit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we just don't have disease problems anymore. You know, we have, seems like, you know, a balance. Just to me, you know, the soil is just like your gut. If you've got a good balance of bioactivity going on in your gut, you're healthy. And the same way with your soil. If you over apply, that's what at least I think I've discovered from it on our farm, is that when we were over applying nitrogen or over applying something, we lost that balance, and that's when we were starting to have other problems. I kind of like associate it to a bodybuilder. You know, a bodybuilder that takes steroids, yeah, they get big and strong and can lift lots of weights, and you know, like your crops can yield lots, they get strong, but they lose some of their defenses. And I feel that's what was happening on our farm when we were over applying maybe fertilizer or concentrating on just nitrogen and not getting a good balance in our soil. But now that we have a nice balance in our soil, we just don't have those disease problems. We've not, the last, almost 10 years that we've been doing this through the transition and now organic, we haven't needed to spray for stripe rust when our neighbors have.
Oh, wow.
And obviously some of it is maybe varietal. I don't know. I'm not sure the varieties, but they're spraying their crops and we're not, and haven't needed to. They just seem like they're stronger, healthier plants than the others. I can't put some science to that, but that's just what we're experiencing. And same way, I think they're stronger against insects. It seems like they're a stronger plant because we have this balance, and that's what we concentrate on soil health, like you were saying earlier, is to make sure we have that good balance of nutrition in there and lots of biologicals, and they seem to thrive better.
Well, there's almost certainly science to be discovered there, looking closer in the soil, and someday we'll probably figure all of that out.
Oh, absolutely.
Tim, it's been a great discussion, and I'm glad you're having such success, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Okay, thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you to Tim Raile for joining me on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future or have a question for one of our guests, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.